My son sold my tools without asking. Then he learned who owned his workshop. The first person to tell me my tools were gone was a man learning how to use his left hand again. Leonard stood beside the adjustable workbench with a walnut board against his chest. His right arm had never fully recovered after a stroke. For 7 months, I had been teaching him to plane an edge with one hand, using a low-angle plane, a stop block, and more patience than either of us expected to have. That Thursday evening, the slot above his bench was empty. So were the spaces for my shoulder plane, 3 carving gouges, the rosewood marking gauge my wife had bought at a farm auction, and the cabinet maker's chest that had carried most of them since 1989. "Frank," Leonard said, "did Calvin move the small plane?" A red extension cord ran beneath the bare wall toward a new edge-banding machine. My son was crouched behind it with the technician. He heard the question and stayed crouched. "Before I tell you why Calvin believed he could sell anything in that room, tell me where you're listening from tonight." I walked over and waited until he stood. "Where is my chest? The reseller took the hand tools Monday." "You sold them during the week and waited for me to notice during class." Calvin looked toward Leonard and the 6 other people at the benches. "We needed the wall, the circuit, and the floor clearance. Those were mine. You left them here for 12 years. Leonard lowered his board. I told him the lesson was continuing. We clamped a sanding block into his vise and worked the edge that way. It was slower, and his hand tired before the board came true. The technician stopped working. Every person in the room knew the class had become a family argument. People with limited grip strength, fused wrists, or poor balance should not have to stand inside somebody else's anger while holding sharp tools. So I finished the lesson before asking another question. When the last participant left, Calvin locked the door and turned the sign from open to closed. His wife, Mara, came out of the office carrying a payroll folder and her coat. "What did you get for them?" I asked. $11,400. "For the chest and everything on the wall?" "The whole lot." Mara said some of the loose tools were listed as program equipment. Calvin looked at her. "Not now. I mean, the inventory was not clean," she said. "That is going to matter." The workshop occupied the first floor of an old furniture hardware factory on the south side of Rockford, Illinois. My wife, Evelyn, had been an occupational therapist. I had spent 36 years as a pattern maker at an agricultural foundry, building wooden forms used to cast iron parts. After I retired, Evelyn began bringing home people who had finished formal therapy, but were not finished trying. A machinist with a spinal injury wanted to build a box for his daughter. A school secretary with tremors wanted to repair a kitchen drawer without asking her brother. They did not want another exercise. They wanted to make something useful. We started with 2 benches in a church basement. Calvin was 17 and spent Saturdays drilling holes, sweeping shavings, and pretending he was only there because his mother had made him come. One afternoon, a former roofer named Wesley could not hold a box steady enough to fasten a hinge. Calvin watched for a while, disappeared into the storage closet, and returned with a plywood corner cradle lined with rubber. Wesley finished without anyone holding the work for him. Evelyn leaned toward me and said, "He notices what people are too proud to ask for. Years later, a local manufacturer donated benches. The hospital foundation helped Evelyn form a nonprofit called Second Bench, and an elderly furniture dealer left the factory floor to the Evelyn Hale Community Craft Trust. The gift came with one permanent condition. The workshop had to remain a place where adults with physical limitations could learn practical trades. People called it Hale Workshop because our name was painted above the entrance. That sign caused more confusion than any legal paper ever did. Calvin left Rockford and built museum displays and trade show exhibits in Chicago. When Evelyn became ill, he came home more often. After she died, he stayed and opened Hale Exhibit Works in the rear half of the building. The arrangement was supposed to last 1 year. His company could use the larger machines after program hours. In return, he would maintain equipment, supervise 2 advanced classes each month, and help Second Bench with installations it could not safely manage. We wrote none of it properly. I told him, keep the place running. Someday it will be yours to lead. Calvin heard yours. I meant lead. For 6 years, neither of us forced the other word into daylight. His company grew to 7 employees. Second Bench grew to 5 weekly classes. Mara handled both schedules because nobody else understood where one organization ended and the other began. The nonprofit paid the electric bill. Calvin paid for many repairs. Volunteers sometimes helped sand his exhibit panels. His employees adjusted adaptive benches without charging labor. From a distance, the arrangement looked cooperative. The later accounting showed how many favors, expenses, and work hours had simply gone unrecorded. Evelyn's friend Priya Desai warned me before she died. Priya had managed rehabilitation programs and served on the board from the beginning. Calvin cannot inherit a charitable trust because you feel he deserves it, she told me. I said nobody was talking about inheritance. She pointed toward a brochure where Hale Exhibit Works appeared larger than Second Bench. Then why does he think he is taking over? I changed the subject. Correcting Calvin would have required me to admit that I needed him. He fixed machines I could no longer crawl beneath. He stayed after his mother died, and I treated his presence as proof that our family had survived. Back inside the workshop, I asked for the reseller's name. The deposit on the Edge Bander cleared this morning, Calvin said. That is not what I asked. Mara shifted the payroll folder. The sale also covered 2 overdue instructor stipends. I turned toward her. Second Bench stipends? The grant ended 4 months ago, she said. Hale Exhibit Works has been covering them. Calvin told her to stop. She did not. I knew the grant had ended. I did not know his company had paid the instructors. At a hallway meeting, I had said Calvin and Mara would handle things until the spring appeal. I meant paperwork. He heard money. Why did you not tell the board? I asked. Because Priya would have stopped classes. She would have found funding. She would have found a committee. Priya could be slow. He was not wrong about that. I asked for the auction information again. Mara wrote it on the back of an envelope. Calvin said, I did not sell museum pieces. I sold old tools that had not been checked out in years. Leonard used the plane last week. He can use a sanding block. He should not have to lose the right tool because your company is short. And my company should not be paying your promises because you like saying yes in front of people. The accusation was close enough to truth that I had to look away before answering. I told him no new private equipment would be connected until the board reviewed the sale. You cannot suspend my equipment. I can suspend private work in a charitable facility. This is my workshop. Mara closed her eyes. No, I said, it isn't. Calvin looked at me as if I had waited for the cruelest possible moment to correct him. The next morning I called the auction house. The chest had been divided into 14 lots. 3 had already sold. The remaining tools could be withdrawn if I paid cataloging, transport, and buyer notification costs. I used my savings. The low-angle plane, 2 gouges, and Evelyn's rosewood marking gauge were already gone. By noon, Priya had scheduled an emergency board meeting for Monday evening. The 5 board members met in the classroom. Priya chaired. Rita Alvarez, a retired union electrician, cared about rules because she had seen what happened when safety depended on personality. Dr. Samir Bell worried that a sudden shutdown would hurt employees and participants. Simone Baker had first entered the workshop after a construction injury damaged her grip. Now she taught part-time and wanted a permanent paid role. Mara attended with the books. Calvin arrived 10 minutes late. Priya asked who authorized the sale. I did, Calvin said. Under what authority? I run the facility. Priya waited. Who owns this workshop? Calvin pointed at me. Frank does, through whatever structure he set up. Frank does not own this workshop. Calvin turned toward me. Priya explained that the building, the core equipment bought through donations, and the second bench name belonged to the Evelyn Hale Community Craft Trust. The trust was irrevocable. It could not be distributed to me, Calvin, or any other family member. My position was managing trustee, not owner. So when he said the place would be mine, Calvin began. He had no authority to promise you ownership, Priya said. Did you know that? He asked me. I did. All 6 years? Every one of them. Calvin looked down at the maple floor. You let me put my company here. You let me pay repairs. You let me cover instructors. You told customers I would take over after you stepped down. I meant the program. You said the place. I used the wrong word. For 6 years, I had no honest answer that made the number smaller. Selling my tools had taught my son, who owned his workshop. The answer was not him, and it was not me. Priya told him to sit because the meeting was not finished. He remained standing while Rita asked whether the tools were mine or the program's. Mara said the inventory could not answer cleanly. The chest carried my initials. 2 gouges had come through a guild donation. The block plane predated the non-profit and had never been tagged. Why was that not corrected? Priya asked me. I kept meaning to do it. When? I had no date. Calvin pulled out a chair. He gets to forget, and I get an emergency meeting. He had a legitimate grievance about the records. Uncertainty did not give him permission to sell through it. Samir asked whether the new machine could be used by the training program. Calvin said yes, with guarding and supervision. Simone asked whether he planned to hire anyone from her classes. I have offered work before. You offered day labor when you were behind. That is still work. For cash, with no set hours. Calvin looked at Mara. She kept her eyes on the folder. Priya said private production and charitable training had been mixed for too long. Calvin answered that he maintained the machines, scheduled around classes, and handled failures before anyone on the board arrived. Priya said doing necessary work did not create ownership. Calvin pushed the chair back. Then you already know what you want. The meeting is not finished, Priya said. It is for me. He walked into the production area. The side door closed hard enough to shake the classroom glass. The board still had to decide what to do with the mess we had made inside it. Rita wanted all private production suspended until the inventory was complete. Samir argued that an immediate suspension could bankrupt Hale Exhibit Works and leave 7 employees without work. Simone wanted private production to continue only if her instructor position and the other stipend were paid directly, not covered through quiet transfers. Priya asked me to leave the room while they discussed whether I had violated my duty as managing trustee by allowing the blurred arrangement. I sat alone in the finishing area. The new edge bander was still wrapped in plastic. On the floor, blue tape marked the zone where Calvin planned to move 2 adjustable benches. I followed the tape with my eyes. The line cut across the only open section wide enough for wheelchair turning space. A measurement was written beside it in Calvin's handwriting. He had not only cleared my tool wall, he planned to move most of the training benches into the narrow classroom and turn the main floor into private production space. When Calvin returned from outside, I asked him about the tape. He said the classes could use the classroom and 2 front benches. 8 people cannot work in there. Then, Schedule 4. We have a waiting list, and I have employees. You were going to reduce the program without telling the board. I was going to stop pretending 5 classes a week fit around a real shop. The tape made the larger plan visible. Selling the tools had cleared space for a machine, and the machine would push the training program into a smaller room. Calvin had not wanted to inherit second bench. He wanted the building and the production floor after the program became small enough not to interfere. He had no right to make that choice. Still, he had been carrying costs the board did not see, and I had praised his sacrifice without asking what he wanted in return. Priya called me back into the classroom. The board voted for a 30-day freeze on any new private equipment installation. Hale Exhibit Works could finish contracted work already in the building, but it could not take new deliveries or remove any shared asset. An outside bookkeeper would separate 6 years of expenses and identify what each organization owed the other. I was temporarily removed as managing trustee during the review. The vote was 4-0. I did not vote. Calvin stood at the classroom door and heard the result. His face barely changed until Priya said the edge bander could not be connected. We have a museum job due in 5 weeks, he said. Priya answered, Then you need another plan. He looked at me. You brought them into this. No, the sale did. You could have talked to me first. I almost answered too quickly. Then I remembered the empty wall. So could you? I said. The freeze began costing people immediately. The machine technician charged a delay fee. Calvin's largest client moved part of its exhibit work to another fabricator, and 2 employees lost overtime they had expected. Second bench also suffered. The Thursday class shared worn tools while the inventory proceeded, and Simone refused to teach another unpaid hour. My choice to force a board review had protected the trust and injured people who had not sold anything. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed away from the workshop except for scheduled inventory sessions. Priya did not trust me to work alone, which hurt more than I expected. Rita and I opened cabinets, checked serial numbers, and compared old donation lists. The records showed years of carelessness in both directions. Hale Exhibit Works had paid for filters, motor repairs, and electrical upgrades. Second Bench had paid utilities during private production hours. Program lumber had been used on commercial mock-ups. Calvin's employees had repaired adaptive benches without charging labor. Volunteers had sanded exhibit panels because they thought they were helping the workshop. The records did not support one clean thief and one clean victim. Both organizations had received benefits that were never properly recorded. The outside bookkeeper, a woman named Tessa Morgan, refused every family explanation. She wanted dates, invoices, hours, and account numbers. When I told her a repair had been Calvin helping out, she asked who had authorized the expense. When Mara called a volunteer's labor just a favor, Tessa asked which organization received the benefit. Mara disliked her by the second day and trusted her by the fourth. Calvin did not attend the inventory sessions. He moved his current jobs to night shifts and spent his days looking for temporary production space. Rockford had empty industrial buildings, but most lacked enough electrical service, dust collection, or loading access for his equipment. A month-to-month space cost more than the rent he had never paid at Second Bench. That fact should have humbled him. It embarrassed me instead. I had told myself free space was how I supported my son. In reality, it kept him dependent on a promise I could not fulfill and kept me important inside a business I did not own. Evelyn would have recognized that sooner. One evening, I unlocked our garage and found the recovered cabinet maker's chest sitting where the auction company had delivered it. The drawers had been emptied for cataloging and refilled without care. Chisels lay beside marking knives, plain irons touched brass gauges. A photograph of the contents had been taped inside the lid so the auction staff could rebuild the lots. I spent an hour putting things back. When I reached for the rosewood marking gauge, my fingers closed on nothing. I knew it was gone. My hand still expected it. Evelyn had found that gauge at a farm auction in Wisconsin. The fence was worn smooth on one side. She said it looked like a tool somebody had trusted for a long time. I sat on the garage floor with the empty drawer open. I did not cry. I was too occupied with arranging tools that no longer had a wall. The next morning, Priya called and told me the review had uncovered another problem. 3 years earlier, I had signed a letter allowing Hale Exhibit Works to describe itself as the operating successor to Second Bench for a city development application. Calvin used the letter to qualify for a small business equipment incentive. The wording was not accurate. The nonprofit still operated. The trust still owned the workshop. I remembered signing the letter at Evelyn's hospital bedside. Calvin had said the application deadline was that afternoon. I read the first paragraph and trusted the rest. Priya asked whether I understood what I had signed. Not fully. Did Calvin mislead you? I do not know. That answer frustrated her because it was honest. When I confronted Calvin, he said the city officer had suggested the wording because his company was carrying most daily operations. He insisted he had not claimed ownership of the building. I asked why he never corrected the phrase operating successor, because I thought I was the successor. You knew Second Bench still existed. I knew it existed on paper while I kept the doors open. He began listing the things he had done: emergency repairs, snow removal, instructor payments, insurance deductibles, customer installations for fundraiser projects. The list was real. So was the resentment beneath it. I told him he had benefited from free space, shared machines, volunteers, and a respected non-profit name. I know, he said. That is why I stayed. I thought I was building toward something. You were building your company. I was building both because you would not choose. For the first time, he sounded tired rather than angry. I asked why he had not demanded a written agreement. Calvin sat on an overturned crate in the temporary space he had rented. The room smelled of cold concrete and fresh-cut particle board. His workers were gone. A portable dust collector stood near the door, already full. Because Mom was sick, he said. Then she died. Then every time I brought it up, you looked like I was asking how soon I could have her chair. I remembered those conversations differently. That did not mean his memory was false. He said he had stayed through Evelyn's illness, taken fewer outside jobs, and built the program's installations at cost. He believed the workshop would eventually become his, because I let him believe it when I needed him near me. The accusation was painful, because it contained my own fear. I asked whether that justified selling my tools. No. It was the first clean answer he had given. Then, call the buyers. I already called the auction house. They would not release the names. Try again. I did. I did not know whether to believe him. He pulled out his phone and showed me the call history, then stopped. This is stupid, he said. I should not have to prove I called. No, you should not have sold them. He put the phone away. I gave him his first private chance to repair more than the tools. I told him to come to the next board meeting, admit the plan to shrink the classes, and propose a fair separation. Calvin asked whether the board would let his company remain. I cannot promise that, of course. I am no longer managing trustee. You still know what Priya will do. I spent years pretending I knew what everybody would do. He rubbed both hands over his face. You want me to walk into a room and explain that I sold your tools because I was angry, used the money because I was short, and wanted the program smaller because it got in my way? Yes, that is not a proposal. It is the beginning of an honest one. He said he would think about it. For 3 days, I believed he might come. I mistook his hesitation for movement toward me. He was only deciding whether he could face the board and say the ugly parts aloud. He did not attend the meeting. Mara came alone. She placed 2 sets of numbers on the table. One showed what Hale Exhibit Works had paid on behalf of Second Bench. The other showed the market value of the space, machines, utilities, and volunteer labor the company had used. The second number was larger. Mara did not present it as a weapon. She said, "We owe more than we are owed. Calvin knows. Priya asked why he was absent. He thinks the board has already decided he is the villain. Simone said, he sold tools that were not his. Mara looked at her. And your stipend came from his payroll account. Simone answered, I did not know that. I know. The room became less comfortable for everyone. Mara proposed a 90-day separation. Hale Exhibit Works would rent temporary space and remove only assets it could prove it owned. The company would repay the net amount from the tool sale to me personally. Second Bench would credit legitimate repair and stipend expenses against what the company owed for past facility use. No cash would move until the accounting was final. She also proposed that Calvin remain available as a paid equipment contractor for 6 months, while Second Bench trained someone else. Priya asked whether Calvin agreed. He agreed to the move. He did not agree to work for the program. That was his second chance. He chose separation without facing the room. The board accepted the 90-day plan with changes. Hale Exhibit Works had to leave the main production floor within 60 days, not 90, because the trust had received a conditional grant to expand adaptive manufacturing classes. The grant required dedicated training space and could not proceed while a private company controlled the floor. The board also voted to hire Simone as interim program coordinator. She accepted only after asking whether the title came with authority or merely responsibility. Priya promised a written job description before her first day. I admired that question. I wished my son and I had asked it years earlier. My own position came next. Priya said the board could restore me as managing trustee after the separation if I completed governance training and accepted limits on unilateral decisions. Rita thought I should remain because I understood the machines. Samir believed my resignation would look like an admission of wrongdoing and damaged donor confidence. I had prepared to defend myself. Instead, I resigned. The choice cost me more than a title. Second Bench had given shape to the years after the foundry and to the years after Evelyn. Without the workshop, my week would have more empty mornings than I wanted to count. Priya asked me to reconsider for 30 days. I said no. You are doing this because you are ashamed, she said. Partly. That is not a good governance principle. No, it is just the true reason. I agreed to remain as a volunteer instructor under Simone's schedule. No keys outside class hours. No authority over equipment purchases. No promise made to a participant without staff approval. When Calvin heard I had resigned, he called me for the first time in 2 weeks. You got what you wanted and quit? I did not get what I wanted. You got me out. The trust got the floor back. Do not hide behind Mom's trust. I nearly told him not to use her that way. Then I stopped. I had used her name to avoid many arguments myself. Calvin said the move would cost him the museum contract. The temporary building could not support the new machine before the deadline. He would have to subcontract panels and accept a smaller margin. 2 employees had already started looking elsewhere. I listened. Then he asked whether I would persuade Priya to extend the deadline. The request involved no money. He wanted me to use the influence I had just admitted I should not possess. I told him I would not. You still have her ear. That is exactly why I cannot. 60 days, Dad. I know. You built this arrangement too. I know. Then help fix it. I am fixing my part by not controlling the answer. He was quiet long enough that I heard a truck backing up near his temporary shop. You always find a way to make stepping away sound noble, he said. Then he hung up. That sentence stayed with me because it was not entirely wrong. The move took 7 weeks. Priya granted 5 extra days after a freight company canceled, not because I asked. Hale Exhibit Works removed its panel saw, spray equipment, computers, work tables, and the new edge bander, still not installed. Second Bench retained the adjustable benches, the central dust collector, 2 shared saws purchased with grants, and every item whose ownership could not be proved. The separation was ugly in small ways. Workers argued over clamps. Mara found private job folders in a non-profit cabinet. Simone discovered half the training jigs had been modified for production and no longer fit the people who used them. Calvin accused the board of keeping a vacuum pump his company had repaired. Rita found the repair invoice and let him take it. Nobody won every dispute. On the final Saturday, I arrived for class while Calvin's crew was loading the last rolling rack. He and I had not been alone in the workshop since the tool sale. Leonard was early. He had brought the walnut shelf back after applying finish at home. The edge was straight enough, not perfect. He asked whether that mattered. Before I could answer, Simone said, "It matters if you wanted it perfect." Leonard looked at the shelf, then said he wanted it useful. Calvin heard him. He kept tightening a strap around the rack. The main floor looked larger without his equipment. It also looked poorer. Empty electrical drops hung above pale rectangles. The program had regained space and lost the person who knew how to repair nearly everything in it. Calvin rolled the rack toward the loading door. One wheel caught in a floor joint. I stepped forward by habit. He raised his hand. "We have it." His employee pulled from the other side, and the wheel came free. Mara carried a small cardboard box from the office and set it beside me. Inside were 2 gouges, a worn combination square, and a brass-spined back saw. "These were in Calvin's private cabinet," she said. "They were not on the auction list." I picked up the saw. It belonged to me. "Did he keep them?" Mara looked toward the loading door. "Ask him." Calvin returned for the box. I held up the saw. "Why was this in your cabinet?" "I used it. You sold everything else." "Not everything." "Why these?" He looked at the saw, not me. "The machine cannot cut an inside corner after the panels are assembled." That is the practical answer. It is the answer I have. Maybe he had kept 3 tools because he needed them. Maybe he had been unable to send every piece of my work away. The difference mattered to me, and not enough to force another argument. I put the saw back in the box. Calvin said the accounting showed Hale Exhibit Works owed me $11,400 from the sale. He could pay half that month and the rest over 6 months. I agreed. He asked whether I wanted the withdrawal fees too. I said no, because I had chosen to pay them without consulting anyone. "That is unlike you," he said. I almost smiled. "Do not make too much of it." He nodded toward the classroom. "The new grant. Is it real?" "Yes." "How many people?" 12 in the first group. With what staff? Simone and 2 part-time instructors. Who is maintaining the machines? We are hiring. He looked around the floor once more. Good luck. It was not kind. It was not cruel either. I said, Calvin. He stopped. You were owed an answer. You were not owed the right to take what was mine. I left it there. Calvin's jaw moved as if he had started an answer and rejected it. Finally he said, You were not owed 6 years of my life because you were afraid to be alone. Then he walked out. The loading door came down slowly behind the truck. Its metal sections rattled in the tracks. Nobody applauded. Leonard asked Simone where to leave his shelf while the finish cured. Life inside the workshop continued before I was ready for it. Hale Exhibit Works survived the move, though not unchanged. Calvin lost the museum contract and 1 employee. Mara reduced her hours and took bookkeeping work for another company. The Edge Bander was installed 3 months later in a smaller building near the airport. The rent was real. The power bill belonged only to them, and every machine had an asset tag with 1 company name. Second Bench struggled too. The expansion grant paid for training, not every repair. A spindle sander failed during the 2nd month. The new maintenance contractor took 9 days to find the part. Calvin would have found one in an afternoon. Simone cut 1 class from the schedule because instructor coverage was too thin. Priya hated doing it. I reminded her that Calvin had once said the same number of classes was unsustainable. She answered, Being right about a pressure does not make his solution right. That was as close as the board came to a simple conclusion. I taught Thursdays under Simone's direction. She changed the curriculum more than I liked. She removed 2 projects that required fine grip and replaced them with a modular shelf system. I told her the old projects taught precision. She told me Independence was not a museum exhibit. We argued twice. She won once. The 2nd time, we compromised. I no longer had keys. On winter mornings, I waited in the parking lot until Simone arrived. The first few times, I resented the locked door. Later, I noticed I slept better on Wednesday nights because no one could call me about the boiler, the roof, or a broken switch. Responsibility had been part of my identity for so long that relief felt like failure. Calvin and I did not speak for 4 months. Mara sent the repayment checks on schedule. She signed them with her name. I deposited each one and kept no copy beyond the bank record. I did not want a drawer full of evidence that my son had once owed me. In February, Priya invited me to the public opening of the expanded training floor. I went as a volunteer. The Hale Workshop sign still hung above the door, but a smaller line had been added beneath it, Home of Second Bench. I had expected the words to bother me. They did not. The new class included a former electrician with nerve damage, a young warehouse worker using a prosthetic hand, and Leonard, who had returned to help newcomers set clamps. He brought the walnut shelf and mounted it beside the sink for safety glasses. People used it without knowing the argument attached to its edge. Near the end of the open house, Priya handed me an envelope. I asked whether it was another form. It came by courier, she said. Inside was the rosewood marking gauge Evelyn had bought at the farm auction. There was no note. The auction house had sold it months earlier. I did not know who bought it back or what it cost. Priya said the courier receipt listed Hale Exhibit Works. I closed the envelope and put it under my arm. Calvin had returned a tool. He had not returned to the workshop. I called him that evening. The call went to voicemail. I did not leave a speech. "I got the gauge," I said. "Thank you." Then I ended the call. He replied 2 days later with a text that said, "It took a while to find." I wrote, "I know." We did not use that exchange to pretend everything had healed. A month later, he called about Evelyn's birthday, not the workshop, not the debt. He wanted to know whether I planned to visit the cemetery that morning because he preferred to go at a different time. The request hurt, but it was honest. I told him I would go before 9. He said he would go after lunch. We were still arranging distance around the same woman. My son now owns a workshop near the airport because he signs the lease, pays the bills, insures the machines, and answers to no family trustee. Second Bench owns none of his labor. He owns none of its floor. I have my cabinet maker's chest in the garage, though several spaces inside it remain empty. The marking gauge is back. I use it when I need it. I do not hang it where anyone can mistake access for ownership. Calvin was wrong to sell my tools. I was wrong to let him build a future on a promise I had no legal or moral power to keep. The board was right to separate us, and the separation hurt people the board wanted to protect. I used to think separating the two sides would settle the argument. It only made the cost visible. Would you have voted to remove Calvin's company from the workshop after he sold the tools? Or would you have given him another chance because his father helped create the misunderstanding